At the Haas Financial Group, we philosophically believe that everyone needs to have a financial plan, right? We want to help them align the resources. If they have pressing financial questions that come with a life transition or a change in situation, or even more generally, just to help them look forward to trying to reach their goals and avoid some of the pitfalls that can come if they don't. And while every client we work with is clearly going to be different and have a different situation, and therefore our advice needs to be personalized, needs to be unique, we know that we typically hear similar questions and clients have typically similar concerns based on the phase of life they're in. So if you're wondering how we can help a typical pre-retired couple through financial planning, we're going to take a couple minutes and show you how. So Adam, let's define what we mean by a typical pre-retired couple through an example we've created, the Millers. Maybe share with us who they are, where they are in their life, and those goals or pain points that may lend them to seek us out.
So we'll start by defining that pre-retiree age range. And, you know, I joke that everyone's pre-retired until they retire. But right. for our purposes here, we would say anywhere from their early 50s up until a year or two before, you know, Social Security says is their full retirement age. So their mid 60s is kind of that bread and butter range where we're looking at here. And obviously the biggest goal in that realm is usually retirement. It's often helping kids get through college from an expense standpoint. They may also have older parents that need support either physically or financially. And then that leads into the pain points of feeling sandwiched between their kids, potentially their parents, all while they're in their, you know, prime earning working years. And then trying to deal with those competing goals all at the same time. And then understanding those domino effects of any one decision, right? Nothing happens in a vacuum. Right. It all can domino. Each decision can affect another. Another pain point that we typically see for someone seeking out advice is that they may be getting too much advice from too many areas. You know, getting feedback from friends or family or coworkers, other financial professionals, oftentimes can be overwhelming. And then it's hard to kind of pinpoint, well, here's what I should do. And here's maybe something I should avoid. It's hard to make those decisions without that holistic approach. So for people in this range, clearly we would give personal and customized advice, but the process that we would follow for this phase of life is pretty streamlined.
Yeah, so I'll pick it up there with the process, right? Often when we meet someone for the first time, as you said, they're probably coming to us ready to share those goals, or they come to us with a pain point, a specific fire they need to have put out. But either way, you know, they're going to come with a list of questions, and it's always our goal to, as quickly as possible, address them, right? Provide immediate education. Education is absolutely one of our core six core values. But I'd also say we have our list of questions that we want to ask them on the front end too, right? Before we can even get to, you know, really diving into financial data on what makes up their situation, we just happen to strongly believe that our best advice is going to come from first understanding what matters most to them, right? How they think and feel about money, what they're prioritizing. We just think all of that's going to lead us to better understand how we should communicate to them. You know, how are they going to best make decisions so that, you know, we really can offer our best advice. So it's not uncommon for us in that first meeting to ask questions like, you know, why is money important to you? Where do you see yourself in 3 years? What keeps you up at night? Right? We think we need to understand your values and vision in order to advise you on your wealth. So that's going to lead to our next step in the process, and I'll toss it back to you. We got to learn what makes up their financial life. So let's talk about, how do we gather data? How would you and I and the team go about analyzing that? And then maybe let's give some financial highlights on what a fairly typical financial profile looks like at that phase of life.
Yeah, so we use a tool called eMoney. That's our financial planning tool. And that helps us aggregate data. There's a client portal that we can share with our clients that they can input a lot of that data. We like to use technology because it helps simplify the process, but that's not necessarily the only way, right? There are certainly relationships that are not comfortable with using the technology, or they just don't feel they're tech savvy enough to really lean into it. So, making copies of financial statements and kind of dumping it on our desk in a folder is more than acceptable. It really is just, you said it well before, the more information we have, the better. Let us kind of do that sifting through of the data to let you know what's important and what's not. So for this pre-retiree couple, it's not so much a focus on cash management or, paying bills or making sure they have an adequate cash reserve. It really is more focused on their phase of life. What do I need to be saving for retirement? Helping my kids pay for education. Where's that coming from? Getting towards the end of potentially their mortgage. If it's not already paid off, it's probably close. There may be a lot of different investment accounts with different investment providers, either through, job changes over the year, or you started different accounts at different times. And there's a lot of different balls in the air that they are juggling, and it's hard to keep track of it all in kind of one spot. Another thing that we typically see is, they had a simple will, but it may not have been updated in quite a while. So that's one of the things that it seems so simple, but it's one of the boxes we like to check just to make sure that those little I's are dotted and their T's are crossed. So our job is to help them sift through all of that, find the gaps that we need to fill in terms of what data we would need, and then start to analyze what's going well, what's not, and then let's start to figure out how we can actually help them.
And it's good to then talk about that next step, because that's what we would propose to do, to when we're sifting through that, start to document at the onset of the relationship how we can help, right? And we'd offer that through a written proposal. And really the purpose of that document is to start to share with the couple, here are what we think your strengths are, here are the things that we think maybe aren't going well, but also be clear about the opportunities that we see in front of them and how we could help. So we're going to list the questions that we'd answer through a planning process. We'd probably share some initial reports to provide education to them and to whatever level of detail they're comfortable with. And then, of course, at the end of that document, right, we want to fully disclose the cost to hire us and what those next steps would be, right? We'd want the Millers to know up front the expense to engaging with us even before they hire us, and we certainly want to quantify that. So let's then talk about that document. Let's talk about the typical questions, again, for this phase of life that we would want to answer for a couple like the Millers. What would be in there?
So I think everyone comes with their own set of questions, right, from their own specific situation. But more often than not, that first one is, when does work become optional? When can I actually retire? And then branching off of that, it's, when should I start Social Security? Maybe I have a pension. When should I start that? Should I choose one of the survivorship options? Maybe there's a lump sum option as well. Should I take that instead of the monthly payments? Leading up to retirement, where should I be saving? Should I be using my 401k? Should I be using the Roth option? Should I just be saving in an after-tax investment account? Maybe the mortgage is all but paid off. Should I take cash from my savings to just get that over and done with before I actually retire? Those are the typical questions that people come to us with. And then there's always that subset of questions that kind of we pose to them. They're questions that may not be front of mind, or questions that they didn't necessarily know they had in the first place. But part of that is having the investments. Now, how do I actually take my investable assets and turn that into an income stream in retirement? How do I do that?
And how to handle the other what ifs. If the kids boomerang back home after college or after the first job because something didn't work out, COVID-19 happens. Mm-hmm. If one of the mothers does need to move in because they do need to be physically cared for, if part-time work popped up or there was a consulting gig that was offered, it's, how do you pay for healthcare if I'm pre-65 years old, right? Yeah. It's maybe okay not to have all those answers, but these are the types of things that we would bring to light to help people understand that they need to maintain some flexibility. They probably need to have an uncertainty bucket, right? That's a term that we use to kind of say we need to kind of insulate ourselves from one of these what ifs happening, whether it's helping the kids or the parents.
Yeah. So the way that we kind of walk people through those scenarios and do that side of the planning work is we use eMoney. eMoney is our financial planning tool, and they have a section called the Decision Center. And there we can actually interactively go through, isolate certain variables, change certain assumptions, and really start to see in real time, the impact on the likelihood of success in retirement that every little decision can make. And again, it's going back to that domino effect of any one decision can affect other pieces, and you can start to pair these together to come up with what feels like a cohesive plan.
Yeah, and it's that decision center coupled with, our process of educating our clients that kind of leads ultimately to the strategy that we're going to want them to implement. So more specifically for the Millers and a pre-retired couple, we give them the education on what we call our 5 retirement planning variables. And you said it so well there. It's to recognize that these variables are kind of intertwined in a way that if you change one, it's going to affect the other. So it is that time. How much time do I have, or am I phasing into retirement, versus what is the income that I know will be coming in against what my expenses are. And that expenses needs to be a conversation of what needs to be covered versus what do you really want to have as kind of the fun money or the discretionary spending. But if we can kind of figure out the difference there, that gap that needs to be filled from our savings, we'd educate them to really know, quote unquote, what their number is. What's the lump sum of savings they need on day one of retirement to really feel confident that they're not going to run out of money. And that is going to lead back to what do they need to be saving today, and what is that risk return profile that they're going to need to have. Hopefully they're in a spot where they can start to phase back on their risk. But certainly this process is going to help us determine that. And that really does lead really well into what you said as part of the questions we need to answer is how do they need to restructure their portfolio for income? And we give them a deep dive into what our 3 bucket theory is, which very broadly and very quickly, you need to have a cash reserve that's going to support the short-term needs so that a market like March of 2020 doesn't become a major stressor. But then you need to have investments that are producing income versus investments that are going to keep up with inflation over time and really do grow over time. So, that's the type of education we'd want to give. All the while, we like to call ourselves kind of the financial quarterback here. We're going to coordinate with the other professionals in their life, their tax attorney, their estate planning attorney, and really make sure that this financial plan is supported by all the people that are supporting you. So let's maybe button this up. We've conceptually covered what the process is, but let me ask you then, what does the relationship, maybe like the time commitment, really look like for the Millers? And then how do we go about delivering our advice?
So initially there's a lot of back and forth. It's meeting time on the front end, right? Where we get to learn about them, what their goals are, what they're looking to accomplish. It's gathering all the data, it's sifting through the data, and then actually getting to that interactive part of the scenario planning. And then actually educating them on their options, and then memorializing what that advice is. What are the actual recommendations? What is that to-do list? And then holding us and them accountable to that to-do list, making it very clear who's going to do what and by when. Some people are happy to delegate a lot of those steps. Yep. Others want to be much more hands-on, but it really just does depend on their preferences. So for the Millers, kind of wrapping that service together, we would call for them, what we would do is called full partnership. It's not only comprehensive financial planning for a flat fee, again, that is clear and transparent on the front end before there's any commitment. But then there's also asset management services as well through accounts with LPL Financial.
Yeah, and I think we'd also say in summary that this planning process is an ongoing relationship. It's not a one-time transaction. I don't think anybody would come to us expecting some sort of product or answer to one question and then to go on their way. We're here to be an ongoing resource and have relationships. which means we're going to be checking in multiple times a year on that to-do list. We're going to be sharing updates with each other, reviewing specific parts of the plan to make sure they still fit and are relevant, and of course, making adjustments when things need to change. So for the Millers, of course, getting to retirement would be a huge milestone that we'd want to be a partner in. But then once they do, we're going to shift our focus to helping them through their next phase of life, whatever that may bring.